November 13th, 2022. In the small town of Moscow, Idaho, 4 bright college students are brutally murdered in their own home. No forced entry, no obvious motive, just blood, silence, and confusion. For weeks, the community lived in fear, wondering if the killer was still out there. And then, a suspect emerged. A criminology PhD student named Bryan Kohberger. A man who had spent years studying the minds of killers, only to be accused of becoming one himself. This is the chilling story of the University of Idaho murders, a case that shocked America, exposed the darkest corners of obsession and violence, and raised a haunting question. What drives someone who studies crime to allegedly commit one of the most brutal murders in recent... Moscow, Idaho. Population barely 25,000. A peaceful college town, home to the University of Idaho. Students come here for opportunity, for community, never imagining that a nightmare could unfold on their very own street. Inside this 3-story house lived 6 young women, sorority members, close friends, roommates. On the night of November 12, 2022, 4 of them would never see the morning. 21-year-olds Madison Mogen and Kaylee Goncalves, 20-year-old Xana Kernodle, and 20-year-old Ethan Chapin, Xana's boyfriend. 4 lives, stolen in the most violent way imaginable. That night seemed like any other. Madison and Kaylee went out to a local bar. Ethan and Xana spent the evening at a party. By around 2 a.m., they had all returned home. Hours later, police would discover one of the most gruesome crime scenes in Idaho history. Investigators said the scene was like something out of a horror movie. Multiple victims, multiple wounds, and one detail that terrified everyone. 2 roommates on the bottom floor survived, completely unharmed. Whoever committed this crime had walked past them and left them alive. Within hours, news of the murders spread across the country. Parents pulled their kids out of school. Students stopped walking alone at night, and the small town of Moscow became the center of a nationwide media storm. But behind the scenes, detectives were facing a nightmare of their own. No murder weapon, no signs of forced entry, no suspects, just a house filled with silence, blood, and questions. For weeks, nothing. Then, investigators revealed a critical piece of evidence, a white Hyundai Elantra spotted near the crime scene. The hunt for that car would change everything. Detectives were stuck. They had combed through the King Roadhouse, gathered DNA samples, interviewed dozens of students and neighbors, but leads were running dry. Then, in the days following the murders, surveillance footage from the area revealed something strange. A white Hyundai Elantra, circling the neighborhood not once, but several times in the early morning hours of November the 13th. Investigators couldn't ignore it. The driver seemed to be stalking the area, waiting. Could this car belong to the killer? Police put out an alert. Find the car, find the suspect. Over 22,000 Hyundai Elantras from 2011 to 2013 were registered across the country. Detectives had to narrow it down, fast. Just miles from Moscow, across the state border in Pullman, Washington, lived a 28-year-old PhD student named Bryan Kohberger. He was studying criminology at Washington State University, and more than that, he was obsessed with understanding the criminal mind. Kohberger was known as awkward, intelligent, and intense. A loner who struggled socially, but excelled in academia. He worked as a teaching assistant, lecturing on criminal justice. And in online forums, he posted strange surveys, asking ex-convicts about their emotions, their thoughts, and what drove them to commit violent crimes. Detectives would later learn that this wasn't just academic curiosity. To them, it was a chilling window into the mind of a man who may have been preparing for something far darker. But it wasn't the Elantra alone that tied Bryan Kohberger to the crime. At the scene, investigators recovered a key piece of evidence, a knife sheath left near one of the victims. On that sheath, DNA. For weeks, the DNA had no match in CODIS, the national database. But detectives didn't give up. They went another route, investigative genetic genealogy. By cross-referencing the DNA with public genealogy sites, they found a familial match. The DNA on the sheath was consistent with a member of the Kohberger family. To confirm, FBI agents trailed Bryan Kohberger in Pennsylvania, where he had returned to visit family. They retrieved DNA from his father, discarded from trash outside the house. The results? A nearly perfect match. The killer had been found. On December 30th, 2022, nearly 7 weeks after the murders, police moved in. At around 1:30 a.m., a SWAT team stormed the Kohberger family home in Pennsylvania. Inside, Bryan Kohberger was taken into custody without incident. The country finally had a name, a face, and a suspect. Kohberger was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. The nation, gripped in horror, now turned to shock. How could a criminology PhD student, a man obsessed with the study of crime, become the prime suspect in one of the most brutal killings in recent memory? Kohberger has maintained his innocence. His attorneys argue that the evidence is circumstantial, that the DNA could have been transferred, that the investigation rushed to judgment. Meanwhile, prosecutors insist they have built an airtight case. They say Kohberger's cell phone data, the surveillance footage, the white Elantra, and most damning of all, the DNA on the knife sheath, place him at the crime scene. As the case heads toward trial, the public waits. Questions linger. Was this a crime of opportunity, a planned obsession, or something even darker? 4 young lives, full of promise, cut short in an act of senseless violence. Madison, Kaylee, Xana, Ethan. Their names are now etched into history, not just as victims, but as reminders of a case that shook the nation. For the families, the pain is endless. For the community, the scars remain. And for the world watching, this case is more than a headline. It is a haunting question about obsession, violence, and the fragile line between those who study crime and those who commit it. The University of Idaho murders remain one of the most shocking crimes in recent memory. And as the trial looms, one thing is certain: the search for justice has only just begun.